Tonight, we're going to explore something that exists in the shadows of countless relationships. A choice made in silence, a secret carried in the chest, a betrayal that changes everything. Infidelity. The word itself carries weight, doesn't it? Take a slow breath. Settle in. Because what we're about to examine isn't simple. It's not about good people and bad people. It's about the quiet, complicated machinery of the human mind when it encounters desire, opportunity, and the fragile architecture of commitment. Infidelity is one of the most painful experiences a person can endure in a relationship. Yet it happens with remarkable frequency across cultures and throughout history. Research suggests that approximately 20 to 25% of married individuals will engage in some form of infidelity at some point during their marriage. Among adults, recent studies, including data from the General Social Survey, indicate that roughly 13% of women and 20% of men report having engaged in extramarital relations. But these are only the reported cases, gathered through surveys where participants may be reluctant to admit to behavior that carries social stigma. The actual prevalence may be higher, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and shame. These statistics, while useful for understanding broad patterns, tell us little about the lived experience of infidelity. Behind each percentage point are individuals wrestling with desire and conscience, partners discovering betrayal, families navigating the aftermath. The numbers cannot capture the sleepless nights, the conversations that change everything, the slow work of deciding whether to stay or leave, to forgive or to end things. When we speak of infidelity, we're not just talking about a single, clear-cut behavior. Infidelity exists on a spectrum, with different forms carrying different weights depending on the individuals and relationships involved. There's physical infidelity, which involves sexual contact with someone outside the primary relationship. This can range from a single encounter to an ongoing sexual relationship. Physical infidelity is often what first comes to mind when people think of cheating, partly because it's more concrete, more clearly definable. Then there's emotional infidelity, where a person forms a deep emotional bond with another individual, sharing intimacies and vulnerabilities typically reserved for a partner. Emotional affairs often develop gradually. They might begin as friendships or professional relationships that slowly cross boundaries. Confiding about relationship problems, sharing personal struggles, seeking comfort in someone else. These actions create emotional intimacy that redirects energy away from the primary relationship. Some research suggests that emotional infidelity can be particularly damaging to relationships, in some cases even more so than purely physical affairs, because it represents a deeper connection, a sharing of one's inner world. And in our modern age, there's digital infidelity, where connections are forged through screens, through messages sent in the quiet hours, through virtual intimacies that never involve physical touch, yet still constitute betrayal. The rise of social media, dating apps, and instant messaging has created new territories for infidelity. Online affairs can involve exchanging explicit messages, sharing photos, video chatting, or maintaining ongoing emotional connections through digital means. Some people argue that online affairs are less serious because they lack physical contact. Others find them equally or more threatening, particularly when they discover their partner has maintained parallel virtual relationships for months or years. There are also what researchers call micro-cheating behaviors, small actions that may not constitute full infidelity, but still violate relationship boundaries. This might include maintaining active profiles on dating apps while in a relationship, engaging in flirtatious messaging with former partners, or seeking out one-on-one meetings with people one finds attractive without telling one's partner. These behaviors exist in a gray area where different couples draw different lines. The boundaries of what constitutes cheating vary from relationship to relationship, shaped by cultural norms, personal values, and explicit or implicit agreements between partners. For some couples, flirting with a coworker crosses the line, representing a violation of emotional exclusivity even without physical contact. For others, only physical sexual contact would be considered infidelity, with emotional connections to others seen as normal and acceptable. Some couples define pornography use as a form of betrayal, while others don't. Some view visiting strip clubs as cheating, others as harmless entertainment. The rise of virtual interactions has created new grey areas. Are online emotional affairs where partners never meet in person still infidelity? What about explicit chat conversations? What about maintaining dating app profiles just to see who's out there? This subjective nature of infidelity makes it even more complex to study and understand scientifically. What remains constant across these varying definitions, however, is the violation of trust and the breach of agreements, whether those agreements were explicitly discussed or implicitly understood. Regardless of the specific behavior, infidelity represents a fundamental breaking of the implicit or explicit agreements that hold a relationship together. The shared understanding of what fidelity means and what exclusivity entails in this particular relationship. Tonight, we'll journey through the psychology of infidelity from multiple perspectives. We'll look at what evolutionary psychology suggests about our mating strategies. We'll explore the neurochemistry of attraction and how the brain responds to novelty. We'll examine personality traits that make some individuals more prone to straying. We'll consider how attachment patterns formed in childhood influence adult relationships. We'll investigate the role of relationship satisfaction, opportunity, and context. And we'll understand the profound trauma that infidelity causes, as well as the difficult path toward healing. This isn't a moral judgment. This is an exploration of why human beings, despite loving their partners, despite knowing the potential consequences, sometimes make the choice to be unfaithful. It's about understanding the quiet mind of infidelity. The evolutionary perspective. Ancient drives in modern lives. To understand infidelity, we must first travel back in time. Not just decades or centuries, but millennia. Our brains, our emotional systems, Our drives and desires were shaped over hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. And the pressures that molded our psychology were often very different from the expectations we place on ourselves in modern relationships. Evolutionary psychology proposes that many of our behaviors, including those related to mating and relationships, can be understood as adaptations to solve reproductive problems faced by our ancestors. In this framework, infidelity is not viewed as a moral failing, but as a behavioral strategy that, under certain circumstances, may have provided evolutionary advantages. David Buss, a prominent researcher in evolutionary psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, has extensively studied human mating strategies since the 1980s. His work, along with that of colleagues like David Schmidt, suggests that humans have evolved a complex repertoire of mating behaviors that include not only long-term committed relationships, but also short-term mating opportunities and extra-pair mating, what we might call infidelity in modern contexts. These strategies exist because they potentially served different functions in our ancestral environment, solving different adaptive problems our ancestors faced. From an evolutionary perspective, it's theorized that men and women may have faced somewhat different reproductive challenges, which could have shaped different patterns of infidelity. The theory goes like this. A man's reproductive success in ancestral times was primarily limited by access to fertile partners. One man could, theoretically, father children with multiple women, and each additional mate represented an additional reproductive opportunity. Therefore, according to evolutionary theory, men may have evolved a psychology that made short-term mating, including extra-pair mating, appealing under certain circumstances, especially when the cost or risk was low. Women, on the other hand, faced different constraints. A woman's reproductive capacity was limited not by access to partners, but by the 9-month gestation period and the demands of raising offspring. One additional sexual partner would not directly increase the number of children a woman could have. However, evolutionary psychologists have proposed that extra-pair mating could have provided women with different benefits. Access to better genetic quality if their primary partner was not of high genetic fitness, acquisition of resources from additional partners, or as insurance against partner infertility. It's important to note that these are theoretical frameworks proposed within evolutionary psychology, and they remain topics of debate and ongoing research. The field has been criticized for sometimes overstating the evidence, for relying on assumptions about ancestral environments that are difficult to verify, and for potentially justifying problematic behaviors through appeals to evolution. Modern humans are not simply acting out evolutionary scripts. We have complex prefrontal cortices capable of overriding biological impulses. We live in the societies with different reproductive realities than our ancestors faced, and individual variation is enormous. Any evolutionary explanation describes tendencies across populations, not deterministic programming in individuals. Nevertheless, some empirical patterns align with evolutionary predictions. Studies have found, for instance, that men are more likely than women to engage in purely physical affairs with minimal emotional involvement. while women are somewhat more likely to form emotionally involved affairs that may eventually become primary relationships. Research from multiple sources, including a meta-analysis of 12 infidelity studies, found that 31% of men reported sexual affairs with no emotional involvement, compared to 16% of women. Conversely, 21% of women reported emotional affairs with no sexual component, compared to 13% of men. Roughly 20% of both men and women had engaged in affairs that included both sexual and emotional connections. Another consistent finding across studies is that men report higher levels of jealousy in response to sexual infidelity, while women report higher levels of jealousy in response to emotional infidelity. Levels of jealousy in response to emotional infidelity. A classic study by David Buss and colleagues in the early 1990s asked participants to imagine their partner either having sexual intercourse with someone else or forming a deep emotional attachment to someone else. When forced to choose which would be more distressing, men were more likely to select sexual infidelity as the more upsetting scenario, while women were more likely to select emotional infidelity. This pattern has been replicated numerous times, though with some important caveats. When participants are allowed to rate both scenarios instead of choosing between them, both men and women find both types of infidelity highly distressing. Additionally, the sex difference is smaller or disappears in some studies when more nuanced measures are used. Still, the general pattern is robust enough to warrant consideration. The evolutionary interpretation of this finding is that for men, sexual infidelity posed a risk of paternity uncertainty. There was a possibility of investing resources in offspring that were not genetically his. For women, emotional infidelity posed a risk of resource diversion. A partner who was emotionally invested elsewhere might redirect time, resources, and care away from her and their children. Again, these interpretations are theoretical and contested, but they represent one lens through which to understand these patterns. Another concept from evolutionary psychology relevant to infidelity is the Coolidge effect, named for a probably apocryphal story about President Calvin Coolidge. The story goes that President and Mrs. Coolidge were touring a chicken farm separately. When Mrs. Coolidge noticed a rooster mating frequently, she asked the attendant to mention this to the president. When the president was told, he asked if the rooster mated with the same hen each time. Upon learning that the rooster mated with different hens, the president supposedly replied, "Tell that to Mrs. Coolidge." The Coolidge effect refers to the phenomenon where sexual interest, which has waned with a familiar partner, can be renewed by the introduction of a novel partner. This has been documented across many mammalian species, and research suggests it applies to humans as well. Studies using physiological measures of arousal have found that repeated exposure to the same sexual stimuli leads to habituation, a decline in arousal. But when a novel stimulus is presented, arousal increases again. This effect appears to be present in both men and women, though research suggests it may be more pronounced in men. From an evolutionary perspective, the Coolidge effect could represent an adaptation that motivated ancestors to pursue multiple mating opportunities. In modern contexts, it helps explain why long-term relationships often experience a decline in sexual frequency and intensity, and why the novelty of a new person can feel particularly compelling. However, understanding this biological tendency doesn't mean we're slaves to it. Humans are capable of recognizing these impulses and choosing not to act on them, maintaining commitments that serve our long-term well-being even when short-term temptations arise. One important caveat: evolutionary psychology offers a framework for understanding certain patterns in human mating behavior, but it's just one framework among many. It's strongest when explaining why certain behaviors exist across cultures and throughout human history. It's weakest when trying to explain individual choices in specific contexts. Evolution has shaped human psychology, but that psychology now operates in an environment dramatically different from the one in which it evolved. Modern birth control, for instance, decouples sex from reproduction in ways that alter the evolutionary logic. Social norms, personal values, moral reasoning, and conscious choice all play enormous roles in whether someone engages in infidelity. Evolutionary forces set the stage, but individuals write their own scripts. The neurochemistry of attraction: how our brains fall in love. Beyond evolutionary adaptations, understanding infidelity requires examining the brain's chemistry. Love, attraction, and bonding are not purely emotional or philosophical experiences. They have physical substrates, networks of neurons firing in particular patterns, neurochemicals flooding particular brain regions. This neurobiological reality shapes how we experience desire and attachment, and helps explain why resisting attraction can feel so difficult. When we're attracted to someone, a cascade of neurochemical changes occurs. Dopamine, often called the brain's reward chemical, surges in regions associated with motivation and pleasure. Dopamine creates feelings of euphoria, energy, focused attention. It's the same neurochemical involved in responses to food, drugs, and other rewarding stimuli. In fact, brain imaging studies have found that the neural activation patterns when viewing a photo of a romantic partner show significant overlap with the activation seen in addiction. Helen Fisher, an anthropologist who has pioneered research on the neuroscience of love, conducted brain imaging studies in 2005, examining people who had recently fallen in love. When participants viewed photos of their beloved dopamine-rich regions of the brain, including areas like the caudate nucleus and ventral tegmental area, showed increased activity. Fisher describes romantic love not as an emotion per se, but as a motivational drive, part of the brain's reward system. This system shows similarities to the neural activation seen with other rewarding experiences. This is why falling in love feels so consuming, so urgent, so impossible to ignore. Alongside dopamine, another neurochemical called phenylethylamine, or PEA, floods the brain during attraction. PEA is an amphetamine-like substance that increases the flow of information between nerve cells and contributes to the feelings of euphoria and heightened attention that characterize new love. Then there's oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone or cuddle chemical. Oxytocin is released during physical touch, during orgasm, and during moments of emotional intimacy. It creates feelings of trust, closeness, and attachment, essentially helping to cement the bond between partners. Vasopressin, a related hormone structurally similar to oxytocin, also plays a role in pair bonding, with research suggesting it may be particularly important in males. The most compelling evidence for vasopressin's role comes from research on prairie voles, a species that forms monogamous pair bonds, unusual among mammals. Neuroscientist Thomas Insel and colleagues in the 1990s and 2000s demonstrated that vasopressin is crucial for the formation of these bonds in male voles. When vasopressin receptors are blocked pharmacologically, male voles lose their preference for their partner and are more likely to mate with other females. When vasopressin receptor genes are introduced into non-monogamous vole species, they begin showing partner preferences. While we must be cautious about extrapolating from voles to humans, studies have found associations between vasopressin receptor genes and human pair bonding behaviors, suggesting some continuity in these biological mechanisms across mammalian species. But here's where things get complicated. This neurochemical cocktail that creates the feeling of being in love, this rush of dopamine and oxytocin and PEA, is not sustainable indefinitely. The brain adapts to sustained activation. Receptor sensitivity changes. The initial intensity fades, typically over a period of months to a few years. This is normal and expected, a biological reality that doesn't reflect anything wrong with the relationship or the partners. Long-term relationships naturally shift from the passionate, obsessive quality of new love, what researchers call passionate love or romantic love, to what's termed companionate love, a deeper, calmer affection characterized by attachment, trust, and commitment. Companionate love has its own neurochemistry. It's associated with sustained oxytocin release, with a sense of security and partnership rather than the urgent craving of early attraction. This shift serves an adaptive purpose. The all-consuming nature of early love would make it difficult to focus on other necessary tasks, from work to child-rearing to maintaining social relationships. Companionate love provides stability, the reliable foundation upon which long-term partnerships are built. However, and this is crucial for understanding infidelity, this shift creates a vulnerability in some relationships. The dopamine surge of new attraction is powerfully reinforcing in a way that the steady warmth of established love is not. It feels more intense, more exciting, more validating. And when someone in a long-term committed relationship encounters a new person who triggers that dopamine response, the contrast can be stark and compelling. Suddenly, there's a choice point. The brain's reward system is lighting up, saying, "Pursue this, This feels important. This feels alive. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and moral reasoning, is trying to apply the brakes, reminding the person of commitments made, consequences that would follow, values they hold. This tension between desire and restraint is at the heart of many decisions to engage in infidelity. Research on brain differences between faithful and unfaithful individuals has found intriguing patterns. A 2017 study examined how men's brains responded to romantic images, comparing those who had been monogamous with those who had cheated. The monogamous men showed greater activation in reward-related areas when viewing romantic pictures. One interpretation of this finding is that these individuals found their committed relationship more rewarding at a neural level. The unfaithful men showed less activation in these regions, which could suggest that their brain's reward system was less engaged by romantic commitment, though the direction of causality remains unclear. It's possible that reduced reward response predisposes to infidelity, or that infidelity itself changes how the brain responds to romantic cues. The prefrontal cortex plays a crucial role in resisting temptation. It's the part of the brain that allows us to consider consequences, to hold our values in mind, to override impulses for the sake of longer-term goals. When the prefrontal cortex is functioning optimally, we can resist the pull of immediate gratification. But many factors can weaken prefrontal cortex function. Alcohol consumption, stress, sleep deprivation, and even just decision fatigue. Some researchers and clinicians have proposed that infidelity can function in ways that parallel drug addiction, with the metaphor of flame addiction sometimes used to describe the compulsive nature of affairs. According to this framework, when someone begins an affair, each interaction with the affair partner triggers a dopamine release. The brain begins to associate this person with reward. Over time, just thinking about the affair partner, anticipating the next encounter, creates a dopamine spike. And when the affair partner is not available, the individual may experience something resembling withdrawal, restlessness, preoccupation, even physical discomfort. While this comparison to addiction helps explain certain patterns, it's important to note that infidelity and substance addiction operate through somewhat different mechanisms, and the comparison serves more as a useful metaphor than a precise clinical equivalence. This neurochemical perspective helps explain why people sometimes describe feeling out of control during an affair, or why they continue even when they know the relationship is damaging. The brain's reward circuitry has been hijacked. Each encounter reinforces the behavior, making it harder to stop. But this doesn't mean people are helpless. The brain is also remarkably plastic, capable of forming new patterns. Breaking contact with an affair partner, just like overcoming any addiction, involves going through a period of withdrawal. But with time, the intensity fades. The dopamine pathways rewire. The prefrontal cortex can reassert control. Understanding the neuroscience of infidelity doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does help us comprehend why intelligent, loving people sometimes make choices that devastate their relationships. The neurochemistry of attraction is powerful, but it operates within a larger context of personality, attachment, and circumstance. Personality and individual differences. Who is more likely to stray? Not everyone who experiences attraction to someone outside their relationship acts on it. In fact, most people experience such attractions at some point. A fleeting thought about a coworker, a moment of imagining what it would be like with someone else. These experiences are common and normal. What distinguishes those who maintain fidelity from those who cross that line? Research in personality psychology has identified several individual difference factors that predict infidelity. Though it's important to remember that these are probability patterns, not deterministic factors. Having these traits doesn't make infidelity inevitable, nor does lacking them guarantee fidelity. They simply shift the odds. One of the most consistent predictors is narcissism. Narcissism, in psychological terms, refers to an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration and attention, and a lack of empathy for others. Narcissistic individuals often view relationships as means to bolster their ego, rather than as genuine partnerships between equals. Multiple studies have found that people high in narcissistic traits are more likely to engage in infidelity. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Research in Personality found that narcissism predicted both the likelihood of cheating and the number of affairs a person had engaged in. Why might this be? Several factors likely contribute. Narcissists often feel entitled to special treatment and exemption from rules that apply to others. They may rationalize infidelity as something they deserve, a reward for being exceptional. They also tend to have lower empathy, making it easier to dismiss or minimize the pain their behavior causes their partner. Additionally, narcissists often have an insatiable need for validation and attention. Even when in a committed relationship, they may seek additional sources of admiration, and affairs can provide a particularly potent form of ego boost. Another personality trait linked to infidelity is sensation-seeking. Sensation-seeking describes the tendency to pursue varied, novel, and intense experiences, and a willingness to take risks for such experiences. People high in sensation-seeking get bored easily and crave excitement. Long-term relationships with their routines and familiarity may feel constraining or unstimulating. The novelty and risk of an affair provides exactly the kind of stimulation sensation seekers crave. Research has found positive correlations between sensation-seeking scores and both number of sexual partners and likelihood of infidelity. Low conscientiousness, one of the big 5 personality traits, is another risk factor. Conscientiousness refers to being organized, responsible, and goal-directed. People low in conscientiousness tend to be more impulsive, less concerned with following through on commitments, and less bothered by moral transgressions. Multiple studies have found that low conscientiousness predicts infidelity. This makes intuitive sense. Maintaining fidelity requires impulse control, the ability to resist temptation in favor of honoring a commitment. Those who struggle with impulse control more broadly are more likely to struggle with sexual impulse control specifically. Interestingly, neuroticism, the personality trait characterized by emotional instability, anxiety, and moodiness, also shows associations with infidelity in some research. One study found that neuroticism was associated with a significantly higher likelihood of infidelity, possibly because the impulsivity aspect of neuroticism may increase susceptibility to acting on desires. Individuals high in neuroticism may be more likely to act on feelings without fully considering consequences, particularly during moments of emotional distress or when seeking validation to manage insecurity. Attachment style, which we'll explore in more depth shortly, also functions as a kind of personality variable that predicts infidelity. People with avoidant attachment styles who feel uncomfortable with closeness and tend to distance themselves emotionally from partners show higher rates of infidelity than those with secure attachment styles. For avoidantly attached individuals, infidelity may serve as a way to maintain emotional distance and avoid the vulnerability that comes with true intimacy. Sexual attitudes and values matter enormously. People who hold more permissive attitudes toward casual sex, who see sex as primarily about physical pleasure rather than emotional connection, who don't view monogamy as particularly important, are more likely to engage in infidelity. This isn't surprising. These individuals simply don't see sexual exclusivity as a core requirement of committed relationships. Their behavior aligns with their values, even if those values differ from their partner's expectations. There's also evidence for gender differences in personality correlates of infidelity, though the patterns are complex. For men, psychopathy and Machiavellianism, traits associated with manipulativeness and lack of empathy, show stronger associations with infidelity than they do for women. For women, emotional instability and certain attachment insecurities may be more predictive. But individual variation within each gender is far larger than differences between genders. One important caveat about all these personality predictors: correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, and even strong correlations don't determine outcomes. Plenty of narcissistic, sensation-seeking, impulsive people maintain fidelity. Plenty of conscientious, empathetic people have affairs. Personality creates tendencies, not destinies. And personality itself can change over time, especially through deliberate effort, therapy, and life experience. Understanding these personality factors serves several purposes. For individuals, self-awareness about one's vulnerabilities can guide choices. Recognizing that you're high in sensation-seeking might prompt you to find healthy outlets for novelty rather than seeking it through infidelity. For couples, understanding each other's personality can facilitate better communication about needs and boundaries. And for therapists working with couples after infidelity, personality assessment can help identify factors that contributed to the affair and need to be addressed for healing. Attachment theory: the blueprint from childhood. While personality traits describe relatively stable individual differences, attachment theory offers a different lens. It examines how our earliest relationships with caregivers create templates that shape how we approach intimate relationships throughout life. John Bowlby, a British psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, developed attachment theory in the 1950s and 1960s, drawing on observations of children separated from their parents. His colleague Mary Ainsworth expanded the theory in the 1970s through her work identifying different attachment styles in infants. The core premise is that infants are biologically predisposed to form attachments to primary caregivers, usually parents, and that the quality of these attachments depends on the caregiver's responsiveness. When caregivers are consistently available, responsive, and attuned to the infant's needs, the child develops what's called secure attachment. Secure attachment creates an internal working model, a mental representation that suggests the world is safe, that others are trustworthy, and that one's own needs matter and will be met. But when caregivers are inconsistently available, rejecting or neglectful, different attachment patterns emerge. Ainsworth identified 3 primary insecure attachment styles: anxious or ambivalent attachment, avoidant attachment, and later researchers added disorganized attachment. Each represents a different adaptation to less than optimal caregiving. Researchers Cindy Hausen and Philip Shaver extended attachment theory to adult romantic relationships in 1987, proposing that the same patterns observed in infant caregiver relationships manifest in adult romantic partnerships. Subsequent research has strongly supported this connection. The attachment style formed in childhood tends to persist into adulthood, though it can change, particularly through significant relationship experiences or therapeutic work. Securely attached adults feel comfortable with intimacy and independence. They trust their partners, communicate openly about needs and concerns, and can both give and receive support effectively. They view themselves as worthy of love and see others as generally reliable and well-intentioned. Not surprisingly, secure attachment is associated with the lowest rates of infidelity. Securely attached individuals are better at communicating dissatisfaction before it reaches a crisis point, and they're more likely to work on relationship problems rather than seeking connection elsewhere. Anxiously attached adults, on the other hand, fear abandonment and crave closeness. But they worry constantly about whether their partner truly loves them. They often feel they invest more in the relationship than their partner does. This attachment style emerges from inconsistent caregiving, where sometimes the caregiver was responsive and sometimes unavailable, creating uncertainty about whether needs will be met. Anxious attachment can relate to infidelity in complex ways. On one hand, anxiously attached individuals deeply fear abandonment, which might seem to discourage cheating. However, research suggests that when anxiously attached people feel their relationship is threatened or their partner is emotionally distant, they may engage in what's sometimes called protest behavior, actions designed to get their partner's attention and reassure them of the relationship's importance. In some cases, this can include infidelity, either as a way to make a partner jealous or as a preemptive strike, leaving before being left. Alternatively, anxiously attached individuals might be particularly vulnerable to affairs when they encounter someone who provides the intense attention and reassurance they crave. Avoidantly attached adults feel uncomfortable with closeness and intimacy. They value independence highly and often feel suffocated by partners who want emotional connection. This style typically develops when the caregivers were consistently rejecting or dismissive of the child's emotional needs. The child learns that expressing needs leads to rejection, so they suppress emotional expression and learn to rely only on themselves. Avoidant attachment shows strong associations with infidelity in research studies. Avoidantly attached individuals are more likely to pursue casual sex, to view sex as separate from emotional intimacy, and to have difficulty with commitment. Affairs can serve multiple functions for avoidant individuals. They provide sexual satisfaction without the emotional demands of the primary relationship. They maintain distance by preventing too much intimacy with any one partner. And they offer an exit strategy, a way to have one foot out the door if the relationship becomes too demanding. Disorganized attachment. The fourth pattern involves a chaotic mix of anxious and avoidant strategies. It often develops when caregivers are frightening or traumatizing, creating an impossible bind. The child needs the caregiver for safety, but the caregiver is also a source of fear. Adults with disorganized attachment may show unpredictable relationship behaviors, sometimes clinging desperately and sometimes pushing partners away. While less research has examined disorganized attachment and infidelity specifically, the pattern of relationship instability and difficulty regulating emotions likely creates vulnerabilities. Attachment styles influence infidelity through multiple pathways. First, they affect how people handle relationship problems. Secure individuals communicate and problem solve. Anxious individuals may catastrophize or engage in protest behaviors. Avoidant individuals may withdraw or seek connections elsewhere. Second, attachment styles influence how people interpret their partner's behavior. Anxious individuals may see distance where none was intended. Avoidant individuals may feel smothered by normal requests for closeness. These misinterpretations can create relationship dissatisfaction that increases infidelity risk. Third, attachment affects emotional regulation. Insecurely attached individuals often struggle to manage difficult emotions effectively. When feeling rejected, lonely, angry, or anxious, they may act impulsively rather than processing the feelings or communicating about them. An affair can function as a maladaptive emotion regulation strategy, temporarily providing comfort, validation, or distraction from uncomfortable feelings. The good news is that attachment styles aren't fixed. While they show stability, they can change through new relationship experiences and through therapy. Relationships with securely attached partners can gradually shift insecure individuals toward more security. Attachment-focused therapy explicitly works to identify and modify insecure attachment patterns. Even after infidelity, couples can use the crisis as an opportunity to understand their attachment dynamics and develop more secure ways of relating. Relationship factors. The context of connection. While evolutionary predispositions, neurochemistry, personality traits, and attachment styles all influence vulnerability to infidelity, relationship factors play an enormous role. Many affairs occur not because of something inherently wrong with the unfaithful partner, but because of problems within the relationship itself. This doesn't excuse infidelity, it remains a choice. But understanding relationship vulnerabilities helps explain why some partnerships are more susceptible. The strongest predictor of infidelity at the relationship level is simply relationship dissatisfaction. Numerous studies have found that people who report lower levels of satisfaction, commitment, and love for their partners are more likely to engage in infidelity. This is straightforward. When needs aren't being met in the primary relationship, people may seek fulfillment elsewhere. But relationship dissatisfaction encompasses many specific issues. Sexual dissatisfaction is a particularly strong risk factor. When partners have mismatched sexual desires, when sex becomes rare or routine, when one partner feels sexually rejected or unfulfilled, vulnerability to affairs increases. Multiple studies have found that people who report sexual dissatisfaction in their marriage are significantly more likely to have affairs. The correlation is strong enough that some therapists consider addressing sexual issues a key component of affair prevention. However, it's crucial to note that affairs don't occur only in sexually unsatisfying relationships. Some people having affairs report their marital sex life as satisfying. This suggests that for some individuals, affairs serve functions beyond sexual gratification. They might provide novelty, validation, excitement, or a sense of being desired in ways that even good marital sex doesn't fulfill. Emotional disconnection is another major risk factor. When partners stop confiding in each other, stop sharing their inner lives, stop providing emotional support, a void opens. One of the most robust findings in infidelity research is that affairs often begin as emotional connections. A person shares frustrations about their marriage with a coworker or friend. That person provides sympathy, understanding, a listening ear. The emotional intimacy deepens. Eventually, it crosses into romantic or sexual territory. These affairs often feel particularly devastating to the betrayed partner because they represent not just sexual betrayal, but emotional replacement. Communication problems contribute to both sexual and emotional disconnection. Couples who struggle to talk about difficult topics, who avoid conflict, who can't express needs or listen to concerns, accumulate unresolved issues. These unresolved issues create distance and resentment. Gottman's research on relationship stability, while focused primarily on predicting divorce, is relevant here. Couples characterized by criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, what Gottman calls the four horsemen, are at higher risk not only for divorce, but for other relationship problems, including infidelity. Life stress and major transitions also increase affair risk. The transition to parenthood, with its sleep deprivation, shifted priorities, and reduced couple time, is a particularly vulnerable period. Financial stress, career pressures, illness, caring for aging parents, all of these create strain that can erode relationship quality. When people are stressed, exhausted, and disconnected from their partner, they may be less resistant to outside temptations and more likely to seek comfort or escape through an affair. Opportunity matters enormously. Most affairs don't begin with someone deliberately seeking to cheat. They begin with circumstances that create proximity and privacy with potential affair partners. Certain contexts create more opportunity: jobs that involve extensive travel, work environments with close opposite-sex collaboration, social circles that include single or unhappily married people, situations involving alcohol in the company of attractive others. Research on workplace affairs finds they're particularly common. We spend enormous amounts of time at work, often more than we spend with our partners. Work provides proximity, shared interests and goals, intellectual stimulation, and often positive regard. Bosses and colleagues may see our professional competence in ways our partners, dealing with us in domestic contexts, sometimes don't. About 30% of affairs involve co-workers. The combination of proximity, shared experiences, and opportunity creates a perfect storm. Social norms and peer influence also matter. People whose friends have had affairs are more likely to have affairs themselves. This could reflect selection. People with permissive attitudes toward infidelity seek out similar friends. But it also suggests normative influence. When infidelity is common in one's social circle, it becomes normalized, less transgressive, more thinkable. The quality of the previous attachment relationship, meaning the relationship with one's own parents or how partners observed infidelity in their family of origin, can influence attitudes and behaviors. Children who witnessed parental infidelity may be more likely to engage in it themselves, either because they learned that's how relationships work, or because they carry unresolved trauma from that betrayal that influences their own relationship patterns. One fascinating finding: relationship duration shows a curvilinear relationship with infidelity, meaning the pattern is not linear. Affairs are less common in the very early stages of relationships when passionate love is high. They increase after a few years when that initial passion has waned, but before deep companionate love and shared history have fully developed. Then they may plateau or decrease again in very long-term marriages, though some research suggests a second peak around midlife, perhaps related to aging concerns or empty nest transitions. All of these relationship factors interact with individual factors. A person high in narcissism will be more vulnerable to affair when relationship satisfaction drops. Someone with avoidant attachment will be more likely to cheat when feeling emotionally pressured for closeness. The neurochemistry of attraction will be more powerful when one's needs aren't being met at home. Individual and relational factors form a complex web of risk and protection. The trauma of betrayal, understanding the aftermath. Having explored why infidelity happens, we must now turn to its consequences. Discovering that a partner has been unfaithful is consistently ranked among the most traumatic experiences a person can endure. The betrayal strikes at the core of a person's sense of reality, safety, and self-worth. Understanding the psychological impact of infidelity is crucial for grasping its full significance. Many betrayed partners describe the discovery as a shattering moment. Life divides into before and after. The world that felt solid suddenly reveals itself as constructed on lies. This isn't hyperbole or exaggeration. For many people, the discovery of infidelity produces symptoms that meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Intrusive thoughts and flashbacks about the affair plague consciousness. Hypervigilance emerges as betrayed partners scrutinize their partner's behavior for signs of further deception. Sleep disturbances, emotional numbness alternating with intense distress, avoidance of reminders, all the hallmark symptoms of trauma can appear. Therapist Janice Spring, who has written extensively on infidelity recovery, describes the aftermath as involving two kinds of pain: the pain of the affair itself and the pain of everything that led to it. The betrayed partner must grapple not only with the sexual or emotional connection between their partner and someone else, but also with all the lies, the manipulation of reality, the realization that the person they trusted most was actively deceiving them. There's often a profound identity crisis. Many people define themselves significantly through their primary relationship. They're someone's husband, someone's wife, half of a partnership. Infidelity forces a re-evaluation. Who am I if I'm not who I thought I was in this relationship? Am I the kind of person who gets cheated on? What does that mean about my worth? The betrayed partner may experience intense self-doubt, questioning their attractiveness, their adequacy, their ability to judge character and read situations. The social dimensions add additional pain. Infidelity typically involves secrecy, and often others, friends, family members, even children, knew or suspected before the betrayed partner did. This creates feelings of humiliation and foolishness. The betrayed partner may feel they were the last to know, that they've been made to look naive or gullible. Deciding whether to tell others about the infidelity creates a bind. Sharing the truth might provide support, but also makes the situation public and potentially more humiliating. Staying silent protects privacy, but increases isolation. For the unfaithful partner, the experience is also painful, though in different ways. Guilt and shame can be overwhelming, particularly when confronted with the devastation they've caused. Some unfaithful partners experience relief when the affair is discovered. The exhausting work of maintaining the deception ends. Others experience their own grief, particularly when they've ended an affair they had emotional investment in. The unfaithful partner must grapple with a damaged self-concept. They've become someone who breaks commitments, who lies, who hurts people they love. The immediate aftermath often involves what therapists call crazy time, a period of emotional chaos where both partners may act in ways they wouldn't normally. The betrayed partner may obsessively question, demand details, check devices, seek proof. They may swing between wanting to understand everything and wanting to know nothing. They may alternate between rage, grief, numbness, and moments of almost manic energy. The unfaithful partner may become defensive, minimizing, or conversely, engage in excessive apologizing and desperate attempts to fix things immediately. Research on the stages of recovery suggests that the initial crisis typically lasts several months. During this period, the fundamental question is whether the relationship will continue. Both partners need to decide, and they need to decide repeatedly as feelings shift. For some couples, the answer is clear. The betrayal is too profound, trust too shattered, and they move towards separation. For others, there's a desire to try to rebuild, even though the path forward is unclear. If the couple chooses to stay together, the work of recovery begins. This is typically a lengthy process, often taking 2 to 5 years for full healing. Early stages focus on crisis management and stabilizing emotions. The unfaithful partner must end all contact with the affair partner completely and definitively. They must become fully transparent, answering questions, providing access to devices and accounts, accounting for their time. This is not pleasant. It feels invasive and controlling, but it's necessary. The betrayed partner's sense of reality has been shattered. Transparency helps rebuild it. The betrayed partner, meanwhile, must gradually work through the trauma. This involves allowing themselves to feel the full range of emotions rather than suppressing them. It involves talking about the betrayal, often repeatedly, until the story begins to lose some of its overwhelming power. It involves beginning to separate the traumatic event from their entire identity and relationship. Middle stages of recovery involve deeper understanding. Why did the affair happen? What vulnerabilities existed? The couple must look honestly at their relationship dynamics before the affair. This isn't about blaming the betrayed partner. The affair was still a choice. But understanding the context helps prevent future betrayals and can help the betrayed partner feel less like the affair was about their inadequacy and more about the complex web of factors that contributed. For the unfaithful partner, healing also requires internal work. Why did they make the choice to betray? What needs were they trying to meet? What internal resources or coping strategies were lacking? Often, therapy reveals that the affair was less about the partner or the relationship and more about the individual's own struggles. Fear of aging, avoidance of emotional intimacy, unresolved trauma, or simple lack of impulse control. Recovery from infidelity is possible. Research suggests that approximately 60 to 75% of couples who discover infidelity initially stay together. Though it's important to note that staying together doesn't necessarily mean the relationship has fully healed or thrived. Among couples who seek professional help and remain committed to the recovery process. Studies suggest that 60 to 80% report that they were able to rebuild trust and leave therapy with their relationship in a much better place than before. However, many couples do successfully rebuild. The couples who navigate recovery most effectively often create relationships characterized by greater honesty, emotional intimacy, and resilience than before. They faced one of the most difficult relationship challenges and survived. That knowledge, while born from pain, can create a deep confidence in the relationship's strength. Closing reflections. We've traveled through many landscapes tonight. From our evolutionary past, where the psychological mechanisms that influence infidelity were forged over hundreds of thousands of years, to the intricate chemistry of our brains, where dopamine and oxytocin create the feelings we experience as love and desire. From the imprints of childhood attachment that shape how we navigate adult intimacy, to the personality traits that make us who we are, creating different vulnerabilities and strengths. From the quality of relationships and what happens when needs go unmet or satisfaction wanes, to the simple but powerful fact of opportunity, the ways context and circumstance can enable or constrain behavior. And we've witnessed the profound pain that infidelity causes, the way discovery can shatter a person's sense of reality and safety, as well as the difficult but possible path toward healing. The ways couples can rebuild if both partners commit to the work. What becomes clear through this exploration is that infidelity isn't simple. It's not a matter of good people and bad people, though the behavior unquestionably causes real and significant harm. It's not merely about temptation and moral failure, though personal responsibility and the capacity to make choices aligned with one's values are essential. Infidelity emerges from a complex interaction of biological drives shaped by evolution, neurochemical processes that govern attraction and bonding, personality traits that influence impulse control and empathy, attachment patterns formed in early childhood, the quality and satisfaction level of the current relationship, and situational factors that create opportunity. Understanding this complexity doesn't excuse betrayal. The unfaithful partner made choices, often many choices over time, that led to the affair. They chose to maintain contact with an attractive person rather than creating distance. They chose to share intimacies that should have been reserved for their partner. They chose to lie and deceive to maintain the secret. These were choices, not inevitable outcomes of biology or circumstance. But understanding the psychological factors that contribute to infidelity does allow us to approach the topic with more nuance, with recognition that human behavior is rarely simple, that people are capable of both profound loyalty and devastating betrayal, often within the same person. When we understand the psychological factors that contribute to infidelity, we can address them proactively. We can work on our attachment patterns through therapy, becoming aware of how our early experiences shape our current relationships. We can manage personality vulnerabilities, developing better impulse control if that's our challenge, or learning to communicate needs directly rather than seeking validation elsewhere. We can invest in relationship maintenance, the daily work of staying connected and addressing issues before they create significant dissatisfaction. We can recognize and avoid risky situations, acknowledging that we're not invulnerable to temptation and that prevention is easier than managing the aftermath of choices we regret. For those who have been betrayed, understanding can be part of healing, though it's not a substitute for the necessary grieving and anger. Knowing that the infidelity often wasn't primarily about your inadequacy, that your partner's choice reflected their own struggles, their attachment patterns, their personality vulnerabilities, and the relationship's dynamics can ease the burden of self-blame that betrayed partners often carry. It doesn't excuse the betrayal, but it provides a framework for understanding that's less about personal failure and more about the complex factors that influence human behavior. And for those who have betrayed, understanding the deeper roots of their behavior, the needs they were trying to meet, the patterns they were enacting, the vulnerabilities they weren't managing effectively, can facilitate genuine change rather than simple regret. It allows them to address not just the symptom, the infidelity, but the underlying causes, making future betrayals less likely. Relationships are perhaps the most complex things we humans create. They require sustained attention, ongoing emotional labor, honest and vulnerable communication, and constant negotiation between individual needs and the requirements of partnership. They're not static entities, but living systems that evolve over time, that require tending like gardens, that can flourish or wither depending on the care they receive. And they exist in a world full of temptation, full of other attractive people, full of opportunities for connection outside the primary dyad. Given this reality, that most of us manage to maintain fidelity throughout long relationships, sometimes across decades, is perhaps remarkable. It speaks to our capacity for commitment, for moral reasoning, for prioritizing long-term bonds over short-term desires. For those who struggle, for those who fail, for those who cause pain or experience it, know that you're not alone in the complexity of being human. The human heart is vast and contradictory, capable of holding seemingly incompatible feelings simultaneously. We contain multitudes, as poet Walt Whitman wrote. We love deeply, and yet we hurt those we love. We make commitments, and yet sometimes we waver. We're capable of profound loyalty that lasts a lifetime, and we're capable of devastating betrayal. Often these capacities exist in the same person, sometimes within the same relationship. Understanding infidelity from all these angles, from evolutionary psychology to neuroscience to attachment theory to contextual factors, helps us be more compassionate and less judgmental. Toward others, yes, recognizing that we cannot fully know another person's struggles, their vulnerabilities, the factors that influence their choices. But perhaps most importantly, toward ourselves, recognizing that being human means having vulnerabilities, making mistakes, sometimes causing harm despite not intending to, and having the capacity to learn, to grow, to make different choices going forward. Take a deep breath. Whatever brought you to this exploration tonight, whatever experiences or questions, know that you're working to understand something difficult and real. That's worthy. That's enough. If you found this exploration helpful, I'd appreciate you taking a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's much more to explore about the human mind, and I'd be honored to continue this journey with you. Until next time, sleep well.